Madam President, I rise this afternoon in support of legislation that would do something that I think most Americans, regardless of where you live and what your economic circumstances may be, and that is to freeze interest rates on existing credit card balances until the full protections of the Credit Card Accountability Act that we wrote earlier this year go into effect. As many of my colleagues will recall, on a vote of 90 to 5, we passed a bill early this year by near unanimous vote, because we had all heard the same stories from our constituents across the country. Credit card companies charging outrageous fees, consumers finding out that the interest rates had been jacked up for no apparent reason whatsoever, families struggling to make ends meet and being driven further and further and further into debt by what I would describe as abusive practices. On that day, Madam President, we declared, on the day we passed the bill, that credit card companies were unfairly padding their profits at the expense of the people that we work for. And so we put a stop to it. Today is no different, unfortunately. Knowing that the Credit Card Act will finally protect consumers from these abuses, the industry has tried to make one last grab for their customers' pocketbooks. And that's what's gone on over these past several months. I think this behavior is deplorable, to put it mildly. And we can once again put a stop to it. And that's what I'm going to be proposing shortly. The legislation that I rise to discuss today would immediately freeze interest rates on credit cards to ensure that Americans are protected until the full provisions of that law go into effect in February. The holiday season is upon us. Hard-pressed Americans want to go out and do what they can to help their families and to celebrate at a very difficult time some joy. And a lot of that will have to occur, obviously, by taking a credit card out to make those purchases during the holiday season. The Thanksgiving break coming up, when putting food on the table, traveling, calling a family member, calling a friend. All of those activities, to some degree, given the hardship people are feeling, will require them using that credit card in too many cases. To do so, of course, they're watching in this window an industry continue to skyrocket these rates as well as these fees on people. And let me tell my colleagues something. The reason we allowed a gap period between the passage of the legislation and the imposition of the regulations or the statutory requirements was because the industry came to me and said, you know, Senator, we're going to need some time to administer, to change how we provide these kind of benefits to people. So would you give us a little window here to operate? And on the basis of that request, we did so. They wanted longer, but we thought February is fine. If that had been what they've done, I think most of us would say here, we understand that. Unfortunately, they've taken that window and used it as a way to jam in on the consumers of this country, particularly at a time when, again, people are losing their jobs, their homes, their health care, their retirement, and the holiday season is upon us. Every 6 months, card companies will be required, under our bill, to review each account that they hit with a high rate hike since January of 2009 and reduce the rate if the customer has become less of a credit risk. Consumers obviously have a responsibility to spend within our means and to pay what we owe. We bear that responsibility. But the credit card industry as well has a responsibility to deal with their customers honorably. And there's nothing honorable about what's happened with these significant rate increases and fees. And most importantly, they do have a right, or don't have a right, rather, to rip off American families, especially when the Congress has already gone on record opposing the very actions that they're engaging in, and doing so in a time frame that was given to them to adjust to the new changes that occurred under the credit card legislation. And instead of fulfilling that obligation, they're using it as a window to grab as much as they can out of the pocket of hard-pressed consumers. So let us help them, consumers, have a break on all of this. And so after I see my colleague from Colorado here to yield for him for a couple of minutes, and when he finishes his remarks, I'm going to make a unanimous consent request that we would proceed to immediate consideration of Calendar 189, the Credit Card Rate Freeze Act, and further that the bill be read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. This would provide us a window for about 12 weeks, that's about what it amounts to, between now and around the 1st of February, during this holiday season, to just put a stop to these outrageous rates and fees being charged to people. And I hope my colleagues, whether you agreed with the bill, although most did, 90 colleagues here voted for the bill in the spring. Why wouldn't you join us today in allowing for 12 weeks of a freeze on these rates that are occurring to give the fellow citizens across this country a chance to meet these obligations. So with that, let me yield for a few minutes. At this moment, do you want to do it? Well, at this point, I was going to yield to my colleague from Colorado for a couple of comments. You want to? Okay, 1 minute or so for my colleague from Colorado. I yield to my colleague from Colorado.
Colorado. Madam President, I want to rise in support of the motion that's been made by the senior senator from Connecticut, which requests consent to debate the Credit Card Rate Freeze Act. I want to associate myself with his remarks, and I'm a proud original co-sponsor of his bill. And I want to urge, as the chairman has, our friends on the other side of the aisle to lift their holds on this important legislation. Madam President, credit card companies have forced unfair and abusive practices on American consumers for too long. I fought for several years and introduced a number of bills that would put an end to these practices. We passed a law this year that would level the playing field for consumers and put an end to the worst abuses by February of next year. But, Madam President, let me tell you what's been happening in the months since we passed that bill. Credit card companies are using that time before the new law goes into effect to get rate and fee hikes in under the wire. And it's happening at the worst time possible, as the chairman pointed out, when American families are struggling in a recessionary period. And the last thing our families need are higher interest rates and extra fees, especially on consumers who are already playing by the rules. This has been a classic case of a David versus Goliath situation, Mr. Chairman, and I say it's time to take on Goliath and stop credit card companies from gaming the system at the expense of American consumers. This bill that Chairman Dodd and I are supporting would provide consumers and small businesses who play by the rules a better foundation to pay off their debts, to help them purchase essential items like groceries or business supplies, and most importantly, ensure that they get fair treatment from the credit card companies. This is a critically important bill for our economic recovery. It's the right thing to do, and I urge my friends to join us on the other side of the aisle and allow it to move forward.
I thank my colleague from Colorado for his remarks, and I know many others have similar views on this as well. And again, I deeply regret that there's going to be objection filed here in a matter that would have really have allowed us to do something meaningful for our fellow citizens at this critical time, at this time of the year for them as well. So I ask consent, unanimous consent, Madam President, that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 189, S1927, the Credit Card Rate Freeze Act of 2009. Further, that the bill be read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Madam President, on behalf of several senators on this side of the aisle, I object.
Objection is heard. Senator from New York.
Thank you, and I am sorry that there is an objection. Oh, I didn't see my colleague. Let me yield to the senator or yield back the floor and take the floor after the senator from New Jersey.
Senator from New Jersey.
Madam President, to my colleague from New York, Senator Bennett and I are here on a different matter, so if the senator is going to be brief, I'm happy to wait until he finishes.
Thank the senator for, as his usual, graciousness. I just wanted to commend my colleague from Connecticut for the outstanding job he has done on this issue, and regret that the move to unanimously move his legislation, of which I'm a co-sponsor, has been blocked. The bottom line is this. We know that there are real problems in the credit card industry, and we know that things are happening that you'd never imagine happen. People moving interest rates. You had your balance, you got $4,000 bucks, 7%, you know your family budget, goes up to $23,000. So the legislation would have stopped that, and now what the banks are doing is jumping the gun and moving things ahead in a way that is very wrong. And so to move up the date would simply make sure this legislation has effect on more people than it would have. It's a good idea. I hope we will still reconsider it later, and I hope that the public who cares about this will let all senators from both sides of the aisle know how important this is. And with that, I yield the floor and thank the senator from Connecticut. He has really been such a leader in fighting for consumers throughout this session. He deserves every American's thanks. Yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from New Jersey.